I never thought a wooden shed in my backyard would become the center of a war that nearly destroyed an entire neighborhood. But here we are. My name is David Kramer, and I have lived in Pinewood Estates in Boulder, Colorado for 8 years. I bought my house back in 2018, long before the current Homeowners Association Board took over, and long before they decided to make everyone's life a living hell with their nitpicky rules. The neighborhood sits at the base of the Rocky Mountains, which means we get brutal winters. Anyone with half a brain knows you need backup power when the storms roll through, but apparently common sense was not a requirement for the HOA board. It all started on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee and checking emails before heading to my job as a software engineer when I heard a sharp knock on my door. Through the frosted glass, I could see a woman standing there with perfect posture, and an oversized purse clutched to her side like contained nuclear launch codes. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Patricia Donovan, president of the Pinewood Estates, HOA, 52 years old, with that distinctive haircut that seemed to defy gravity and logic. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit despite the freezing temperatures, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that suggested she had just tasted something unpleasant. "David Kramer," she said, even though she knew exactly who I was. We had lived in the same neighborhood for 3 years at this point. "Patricia, what can I do for you?" She pulled out a folder from her purse and flipped it open with theatrical precision. "I am here on behalf of the HOA board to inform you that you are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines. You have erected an unauthorized structure on your property without board approval." I blinked at her. "What are you talking about?" "The shed in your backyard. It violates our aesthetic guidelines and was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee." I felt my jaw clench. That shed has been there for 2 months. I built it to house my backup generator. You know, in case the power goes out during one of our famous Colorado blizzards. Patricia's expression did not change. "Regardless of your reasoning, the structure was not approved. You have 30 days to remove it, or the HOA will begin fining you $200 per day until compliance is achieved." You cannot be serious. I am always serious when it comes to maintaining property values. "Mr. Kramer, the shed is an eyesore. It is visible from the Hendersons' second-floor bathroom window, and they have filed a complaint. The Hendersons can see into my backyard from their bathroom window. Maybe they should stop looking." Patricia snapped the folder shut. "You have 30 days. Good morning." She turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus, like a general leaving a battlefield. I stood there in my doorway, cold air rushing past me, absolutely stunned. The shed was not even visible from the street. It was a simple 10x 12-feet structure painted forest green to blend in with the surrounding trees. I had spent 3 weekends building it myself, making sure it was sturdy and weatherproof. Inside was my Honda generator, fuel cans, and some basic emergency supplies. It was practical, necessary, and completely reasonable. But apparently reasonable did not factor into Patricia Donovan's world. I called my neighbor Frank Morrison, a retired electrician who had lived in Pinewood Estate since it was built in 2003. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank, it is David. Can I ask you something about the HOA?" "Oh, boy, what did Patricia do now?" "She is demanding I tear down my generator shed. Says it is not approved and violates aesthetic guidelines." Frank let out a long whistle. "Yeah, that sounds like her. She has been on a power trip ever since she became president. Last month, she tried to find the Chens because their Christmas lights were allegedly the wrong shade of white. The wrong shade of white. David, can she actually find me $200 a day if it is in the CC and Arctic?" "Yeah, but here's the thing. When they revised the guidelines 2 years ago, a bunch of us voted against it. The meeting was held during a weekday afternoon when most people were at work. Only about 15% of residents actually voted. I am not even sure it was legal. That got my attention. So what you're saying is the current rules might not be legitimate. I am saying you might want to get a lawyer and check. Patricia and her crew, they do not like being challenged, but they also cut a lot of corners to get their way." I thanked Frank and hung up. Then I did what any reasonable person would do in 2025. I started researching Colorado HOA laws. I spent my lunch break reading through statutes and legal precedents, and what I found made my blood boil. According to Colorado revised statutes, any amendment to HOA governing documents required a vote of at least 51% of all homeowners, not just those present at a meeting. If Frank was right about the low turnout, the entire revision might be invalid. But I also knew that fighting an HOA was expensive and time-consuming. These battles could drag on for years, racking up legal fees that dwarfed any potential fines. I had heard horror stories from colleagues who had been bankrupted by HOA disputes. I needed to be smart about this. That evening, I printed out copies of the Colorado statutes and highlighted the relevant sections. Then I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board citing the legal issues with the revised guidelines and requesting a full audit of the vote that had approved them. I hand-delivered it to Patricia's mailbox the next morning, making sure to take a photo of the timestamp for my records. 3 days later, I received a response, not from Patricia, but from the HOA's lawyer, a man named Gregory Walsh from a firm in downtown Boulder. The letter was brief and threatening. It stated that my concerns had been reviewed and found to be without merit, that the HOA's guidelines were legally binding, and that failure to comply would result in immediate fines and potential legal action, including a lien on my property. A lien? They were threatening to put a lien on my house over a garden shed. I called Frank again. They sent me a letter from their lawyer. They are threatening a lien. Jesus. Patricia really does not like being told no. Listen, there's a community meeting next week. You should come and bring this up publicly. A lot of folks are getting tired of her act. Maybe if enough people push back, the board will back down. The meeting was held at the Pinewood Estates Clubhouse, a small building near the community pool that always smelled vaguely of chlorine. I arrived 15 minutes early and found about 30 residents already there, most of them older couples who had been in the neighborhood for decades. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members. Treasurer Ronald Schmidt, a balding accountant who looked perpetually nervous, and Secretary Linda Hayes, a mousy woman who seemed to exist solely to nod at everything Patricia said. I took a seat in the third row, right behind Frank. He gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we will be discussing several important matters, including upcoming holiday decoration guidelines and snow removal protocols. But first, I would like to address a concerning matter regarding resident compliance. She looked directly at me. It has come to the board's attention that one of our residents has been spreading misinformation about the legitimacy of our community guidelines. I want to make it abundantly clear that all current rules and regulations were properly approved and are legally binding. Any resident who refuses to comply will face the consequences outlined in our governing documents. My face got hot. She was calling me out without using my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Frank stood up. Patricia, I think what David is asking for is reasonable transparency. A lot of us were not aware of the vote that approved the current guidelines. Could you provide documentation showing how many residents participated? Patricia's smile was icy. The vote was properly conducted and recorded. If residents choose not to participate in community governance, that is their choice, but it does not invalidate the process. How many people voted? I asked standing up. That information is in the meeting minutes, which are available upon request. I am requesting it right now. Ronald, the treasurer, shuffled some papers nervously. Patricia, maybe we should just provide the numbers. Patricia shot him a look that could have stripped paint. The exact numbers are not relevant to tonight's discussion. We are here to talk about community matters, not to relitigate settled issues. 23, Ronald said quietly. Patricia turned to him sharply. Ronald, 23 residents voted to approve the guideline revisions, he continued, his voice getting slightly stronger. Out of 147 households. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, voices rising in anger and confusion. Patricia banged her gavel, but the noise only got louder. Frank stood up again, his face red. That is less than 16%. How the hell is that a legitimate vote? The vote was conducted according to the procedures outlined in our bylaws, Patricia said, her voice tight. Residents were notified via email 3 weeks in advance. During August, someone shouted from the back. Half the neighborhood was on vacation, and the meeting was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Another voice added, "Most people were at work." I watched Patricia's face grow more and more pinched as the room turned against her. Linda, the secretary, was frantically taking notes while Ronald looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Finally, Patricia stood up and slammed her hand on the table. "Enough. This board was elected to make decisions on behalf of this community, and that is exactly what we are doing. If you do not like it, you are free to run for the board during the next election cycle. Until then, the guidelines stand and they will be enforced. Mr. Kramer, you have 24 days left to remove your unauthorized structure. This meeting is adjourned." She gathered her papers and walked out, leaving Linda and Ronald to deal with the angry crowd. I sat back down, my heart pounding. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, you stirred the hornets' nest. That is more than I have seen people fired up in years." Over the next week, I became something of an accidental neighborhood activist. People stopped me during my morning runs to share their own HOA horror stories. The Chens told me about the Christmas light incident. The Johnsons described being fined for having the wrong style of mailbox. Mrs. Kowalski, a 78-year-old widow, tearfully explained how she had been cited for having a vegetable garden that was apparently against the aesthetic guidelines, even though she had been growing tomatoes in her backyard for 15 years. I started documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet with every complaint, every fine, and every violation notice issued in the past 2 years. The pattern was clear. Patricia and her board had systematically targeted anyone who did not fall in line, using fines and violations as weapons to enforce their control. Several families had even sold their homes and moved away rather than deal with the constant harassment. I reached out to a lawyer, Maria Gonzalez, who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed my documentation and the vote records that Ronald had finally provided after I submitted a formal written request. "This is egregious," she said, sitting across from me in her office in downtown Boulder. "The Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act is very clear about voting requirements. They needed at least 75 homeowners to vote yes for this amendment to be valid, and they got 23. This is textbook procedural violation. So what can I do? We can challenge the validity of the entire guideline revision in court. If we win, it reverts back to the previous version, which I assume was less restrictive, much less. The old guidelines basically just said, keep your lawn mowed and do not paint your house neon green. Then that is your play. But I need to be honest with you, David. This will not be quick or cheap. HOA litigation can drag on for a year or more, and legal fees can easily hit $20,000 or $30,000. Even if you win, collecting attorney's fees from the HOA can be difficult. I sat back in a chair, feeling the weight of the decision, $30,000. That was a significant chunk of my savings. But the alternative was tearing down a structure I needed, paying ongoing fines, or selling my house and moving. None of those options were acceptable. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, the first snow of the season started falling. I stood at my back window, watching the flakes accumulate on my generator shed, and made my decision. I was not going to back down. The next morning, I called Maria and told her to file the lawsuit. Patricia received the court papers on a Friday. By Saturday morning, I had a new certified letter from the HOA. They were implementing immediate fines of $200 per day starting that Monday for my failure to remove the shed.